When a ruthless HOA president builds her dream mansion on a man's private land, she thinks she's untouchable. But she picked the wrong target, and he's about to teach her a brutal lesson in justice. Under the wide expanse of Arizona sky, Walter Green had lived in quiet contentment for over a decade on a stretch of land that had been in his family for generations. The Green property, a solid 20 acres of semi-rural peace, sat on the edge of a rapidly growing development known as Silver Pines, a neighborhood of pristine sidewalks, regulation mailboxes, and a homeowners association with more power than sense. Walter's land, rich with wild mesquite and dusty trails, was a remnant of the past, untamed, unzoned, and completely free from the iron grip of the HOA that ruled over Silver Pines, like a suburban monarchy. And that was exactly how Walter liked it. Walter, a retired structural engineer in his late 50s, had inherited the land from his father, who had always told him, "They can build their kingdoms of concrete all around us, son, but never let them build over you." He took that to heart. While modern developments crawled closer each year, Walter kept to himself, occasionally riding his ATV across the brush, fixing his fences, or tending to the small orchard he maintained out of nostalgia more than necessity. He wasn't a recluse, just a man who valued privacy and independence more than polished lawn edges and neighborhood bake sales. Silver Pines had sprouted up quickly 5 years ago. Where there was once empty land, now stood rows of oversized homes with neatly trimmed hedges and matching solar panels. At first, Walter had no quarrel with the encroaching suburb. Let them build their paradise, he thought. Just stay on your side of the line. But almost as soon as the paint dried on the first house, the letters began arriving. From the HOA. First, a polite suggestion about aligning his mailbox design with community standards. Then came a notice expressing concern over the visual discord between his wild acreage and the Silver Pines aesthetic. Walter chuckled at the idea of a weed being an offense, crumpled the letters, and tossed them into the fireplace. But one name kept appearing at the bottom of those messages: Karen Lawson, president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. Her reputation preceded her. Rumor among nearby residents painted her as a woman with a clipboard in one hand and a lawsuit in the other, always watching, always organizing, always correcting. Walter had never met her in person, but he imagined her as the type who measured her neighbor's grass with a ruler and cited bylaws as if they were gospel. He didn't think much of it. People like that, they eventually burned out when ignored. But what Walter didn't yet realize, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that Karen Lawson wasn't just annoyed by his existence. She had a plan, and it wasn't just about conformity. It was about conquest. When Walter returned home after 3 months away, time spent caring for his aging uncle up in Montana, he expected the usual sights: his dusty driveway, the scattered mesquite swaying in the desert breeze. Maybe a jackrabbit darting across his path. What he didn't expect was the sound of hammers clapping in rhythm and the mechanical groan of construction equipment tearing into the land he knew like the back of his weathered hand. At first, he thought he'd taken a wrong turn. There, on the southern edge of his property where the mesquite trees used to cast long shadows in the afternoon, stood the framework of a house. A brand new house. Concrete had been poured. The framing was nearly complete. Workers in hard hats moved about, shouting measurements and hauling lumber. A tall privacy fence wrapped halfway around the site, and a portable toilet leaned crookedly near what looked like the future driveway. Walter slowed his truck to a crawl, staring out the window in disbelief. He parked by the gate he himself had installed years ago and marched toward the construction site, boots kicking up dry earth. A young man in a neon vest looked up from a clipboard and smiled, assuming Walter was just another curious neighbor. "You the project manager?" Walter asked sharply. "No, sir. I'm just with logistics. You here to check on the Lawson build?" Walter froze. The what? The Lawson place? Big two-story, custom layout? President of the HOA herself. She said she finally got the rights to extend Silver Pines. This one's going to be her dream house. Walter's heart thudded in his chest. This is my land, he said, more to himself than the worker. This is Greenland. Always has been. The worker blinked, clearly uncertain how to respond. You sure? We've got the permit right here somewhere. Karen Lawson handled all that with the HOA's lawyer. Said this corner was finally released for development. Walter didn't say another word. He turned and walked back to his truck, fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight. As he drove slowly toward the main road, he glanced once more at the growing skeleton of someone else's dream. A house that didn't belong, rooted in earth that wasn't theirs. His land, his legacy, stolen. And suddenly, Karen Lawson had a lot more than a messy mailbox to answer for. Walter didn't wait a day, or even an hour. The moment he got back to his house, he stormed inside, grabbed the thick folder of property records he kept in a locked drawer, and set out for Silver Pines. The HOA office, a sleek little building nestled beside a man-made pond and a miniature gazebo, looked more like a country club than a neighborhood administration center. Walter parked, marched past the glass doors, and walked straight up to the reception desk. "I need to speak to Karen Lawson," he said, voice low but tight with restrained fury. The receptionist, a young man with a polished smile and nervous energy, hesitated. "She's in a meeting right now. Could I ask what this is?" "She built a house on my land. That's what this is about." The smile vanished. The young man disappeared down the hallway, and moments later, Karen Lawson emerged, crisp and composed in a tailored navy blazer. Her expression soured the moment she saw Walter. "Mr. Green," she said, cool as a marble countertop. "I wasn't aware you had an appointment." "I didn't know I needed one to demand why there's a mansion going up on my soil," Walter snapped, slapping the folder onto the counter between them. Karen didn't flinch. "That land was recently annexed by Silver Pines," she said smoothly. "There was a reparceling initiative passed last quarter. You must have received the notices. I received harassment disguised as letters, not a legal deed transfer," Walter growled. Karen pulled out a digital tablet, tapped a few times, and swiveled the screen toward him. "According to our updated records, the southern portion of your land, what we're calling Parcel 7B, is under HOA jurisdiction. The vote passed, the zoning board approved it, and it was properly recorded. You should really keep up with local governance." Walter leaned in. "That land was never for sale. I never signed anything. You forged something, or bribed someone, and I'm going to prove it." Karen's expression tightened for just a heartbeat. "Do what you must," she said, reclaiming her composure. "But if you continue to disrupt HOA activities, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement." Walter gave her a thin, cold smile. "Go ahead and call them. Just make sure they bring handcuffs. For you." Walter didn't waste time stewing in anger. He returned home with fire in his chest and steel in his spine. The house Karen was building might have looked like progress to others, but to him, it was a scar cut into his land, into his family's legacy. And now, it was time to sharpen every tool he had. First, he pulled out the original deed to the property, an unbroken chain of ownership going back nearly 70 years. Every survey, plat map, and notarized document was there, with clear coordinates and boundary lines that left no room for interpretation. The section now being developed was, without question, well within his property. He scanned everything, made digital copies, and sent them to his longtime attorney, Maureen Keating, a tough-as-nails land use specialist who owed him more than a few favors. Within hours, Maureen called back. Her voice was brisk and tinged with disbelief. "Walter, if what you sent me is accurate, and it looks airtight, then someone's either criminally incompetent or flat out forged municipal paperwork. I want to loop in a title investigator and a private eye. This smells rotten," Walter agreed. While Maureen began untangling the legal knots from her end, Walter met with the private investigator she recommended, a former county assessor named Ray Delgado. Ray had a knack for sniffing out dirty land deals, and within 3 days, he had a trail. "It's a shell game," Ray explained, spreading out copies of public zoning records and recent filings from the county clerk's office. The HOA filed a parcel adjustment request, claiming it was a clerical correction to match older community plans. Problem is, those plans were never officially adopted. And here's the kicker. Karen used a notarized document allegedly signed by you in 2016, granting easement rights. Look familiar? Walter looked at the signature. His name was there, but the handwriting was laughably off. "That's a fake." Ray nodded grimly. "And that fake was used to push through a rushed approval with the zoning board right before the construction began. Karen greased the right palms. She's not just power-hungry. She's bold, reckless, and dumb enough to leave a paper trail." Walter clenched his fists. "Then let's follow it, all the way to court." Armed with documentation, expert witnesses, and the slow-burning fury of a man watching his legacy trampled, Walter filed for an injunction against further construction on his land. His attorney, Maureen, submitted the motion to the county court, complete with maps, surveys, and a sworn affidavit regarding the forged signature. It should have been a slam dunk, a simple pause on all work until ownership could be clarified. But simple, it turned out, wasn't part of the Silver Pines playbook. At the preliminary hearing, Karen showed up with a team of 3 lawyers, all in dark suits and smug expressions. They argued the property in question had already been incorporated into Silver Pines jurisdiction and presented doctored HOA meeting minutes that allegedly showed Walter's absence from multiple votes. They painted him as a reclusive, uncooperative landholder who had long ignored civic engagement. Walter almost laughed in disbelief when one of the attorneys suggested that his neglect of the property constituted grounds for community reallocation. The judge, cautious bureaucrat with a distaste for neighborhood politics, hesitated. "It appears," he said slowly, "that this is more complex than a simple property line dispute. Until ownership is definitively resolved, I am unwilling to issue a stop work order that could impact innocent contractors and scheduled financing." Karen smiled, victorious in the moment, even as Walter's jaw tightened. By the next week, the construction crew was back at full speed. Cement trucks rumbled down the road. Roof frames rose against the sky. Walter watched from the edge of his property, expression stony. Karen even had the audacity to wave at him one morning, wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, as if she were vacationing in the Hamptons. To the outside world, she had won. The future Karen Lawson residence was nearly enclosed. She boasted about it at HOA meetings, and even gave a local real estate blogger an interview, calling it a symbol of community leadership and responsible growth. But she didn't know what Walter knew, that her confidence was built on a foundation of lies and ink-stained fraud. And Walter wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The tide began to turn on a brisk Tuesday morning, weeks after the court's refusal to halt construction. By then, the bones of Karen Lawson's dream home were in place. Stucco walls, Spanish tile roofing, manicured landscaping already underway. But beneath the freshly poured concrete and designer ambitions, a rot was spreading. Walter, with Maureen and Ray at his side, had been quietly building a legal missile, and now it was ready to launch. The breakthrough came when Ray obtained an email chain between Karen and a mid-level zoning officer. The messages, acquired through a public records request, showed Karen pressuring the official to fast-track approval of parcel adjustments by referencing an internal agreement with Walter, an agreement that never existed. One email even attached the forged document bearing Walter's fake signature. It was the smoking gun. Maureen immediately turned the evidence over to the county district attorney's office. And within days, the wheels of justice began to grind. An investigator from the DA's office met with Walter at his home, listened carefully, reviewed the documents, and by the end of the meeting said only, "We'll take it from here." What followed happened fast. Lightning fast, by bureaucratic standards. A grand jury was convened, and within 2 weeks, felony charges were filed against Karen Lawson: fraudulent conveyance, falsifying public records, and criminal conspiracy to misappropriate land. An arrest warrant was issued. She was taken into custody during what was supposed to be a ribbon-cutting photo op at the construction site, escorted away in handcuffs as news cameras, alerted by a conveniently timed anonymous tip, recorded every second. Her stony silence as she was placed in the back of a cruiser became an instant local headline: HOA president arrested in land fraud scandal. But Walter wasn't finished. He filed a civil suit not just against Karen, but against the Silver Pines HOA as an entity, accusing them of systemic misconduct and negligence for allowing their president to use community resources to steal land. The HOA board scrambled, issuing a bland press release distancing themselves from Karen, claiming they had no knowledge of her actions. But Maureen's legal team was already several steps ahead. Financial records showed HOA funds, dues paid by residents, had been redirected to pay for Karen's architect, her landscaping, and even a home automation system. The case was airtight. While Karen sat in a county jail cell awaiting arraignment, her dream home stood frozen in time, half-finished, silent, and fenced off with police tape. Walter drove by it once, slowly, windows down, letting the silence soak in. The sun hit the facade just right, casting long shadows across the unfinished porch. It was poetic, he thought. She tried to steal from him with arrogance and lies. Now she'd have nothing. And soon, her precious HOA would follow. Karen Lawson's fall from grace wasn't just swift. It was seismic. Her arraignment was a local spectacle, drawing curious onlookers and news vans that hadn't been seen in town since the last wildfire. She arrived in court in a beige jumpsuit, no longer the coiffed symbol of suburban perfection, but a disgraced administrator wrapped in chains of her own making. The judge denied her bail, citing the seriousness of the fraud and the potential for further tampering with evidence. That alone sent a wave of panic through the remaining HOA board, who suddenly realized they weren't spectators. They were potential co-defendants. Walter's civil suit hit the HOA like a wrecking ball. Under court order, forensic accountants combed through years of financial records and uncovered a trove of misused funds, trips disguised as conferences, bonuses for fabricated consulting, and thousands poured into Karen's home under bogus invoices. Residents who once blindly trusted the HOA now lined up to testify, furious to learn their dues had financed the palace Karen was building on stolen soil. The courtroom drama played out over several tense months. Walter attended every hearing, clean-cut and composed, seated calmly behind his lawyers as the defense unraveled. Maureen dismantled their arguments piece by piece. When Karen's attorney claimed the HOA had acted in good faith, Maureen presented evidence that board members had received kickbacks, gift cards, event tickets, even a cruise for one couple who had signed off on the zoning documents. In the end, the verdicts came like dominoes. Karen Lawson was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole in 4. The court ordered restitution payments to Walter and levied a massive fine against the Silver Pines HOA. The civil suit ended with a settlement so large the HOA was forced into a full structural reorganization to avoid dissolution. Karen's half-built house was seized by the state and eventually demolished. An ugly monument to arrogance turned into rubble. Walter wasn't done. Using the settlement funds, along with a separate defamation payout for the smear campaign Karen had tried to launch early on, Walter purchased the adjoining strip of land that bordered the Silver Pines entrance, and on that land, he erected something special, a modest but permanent display, framed in oak and steel with a simple bronze plaque. It read, "Private property, falsely claimed, rightfully reclaimed, in memory of boundaries crossed and justice delivered." The irony wasn't lost on the HOA's new interim board. They held their first community meeting under new leadership, just 50 feet from the memorial. Several of them came to shake Walter's hand, offering quiet apologies and uncomfortable gratitude. He accepted both without smugness. His victory didn't need to be loud. It only needed to last. The final blow came when the HOA, under court oversight, was required to send a letter to all residents outlining the details of the fraud, the misuse of funds, and a formal apology to Walter Green by name. They mailed it. He framed his copy. And every now and then, when he passed the place where Karen's house had once stood, he'd glance toward the bare lot, now slowly being overtaken by native grass and wild mesquite. It looked more like his land again. Peaceful, untouched, just the way it should be. Months passed, and the scandal that had rocked Silver Pines slowly faded from the headlines, but its echoes lingered, stitched into the fabric of the neighborhood like a scar and a warning. The lot where Karen Lawson's mansion once stood remained empty, now overgrown with golden weeds and desert wildflowers, as if the land itself was reclaiming what had been wrongfully taken. Walter Green rarely spoke of what had happened unless someone asked, but his presence in the community had quietly shifted from distant outsider to something else entirely. It started with a knock on his door one early spring morning. A group of Silver Pines residents, some former critics, some complete strangers, stood on his porch, sheepish but sincere. They wanted his advice. The newly elected HOA board, now comprised of practical, reform-minded homeowners, was trying to reshape the association into something transparent and humane. Walter listened, arms crossed at first, then slowly unfolded. He didn't agree to join, of course, but he did offer guidance, firm, honest, and without condescension. Later that summer, Walter organized a community barbecue, not under obligation, but out of curiosity. He invited the new board, a few longtime neighbors, and even those who had once sided with Karen. People came with casseroles, lawn chairs, and kids in tow. They ate under string lights hung from mesquite branches and laughed as Walter's old hound wandered from guest to guest, begging for scraps. There were no speeches, no drama, just neighbors being neighbors for once. On the anniversary of the injunction's filing, Walter returned to the bronze plaque by the old entrance. Someone had left a bouquet of desert flowers beneath it, tied with a red ribbon. He didn't know who. He didn't ask. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain, and he stood there for a long moment. In the end, it wasn't just about property lines or forged signatures. It was about principle, about standing tall when others tried to bend the truth. And as Walter walked back to his house past the whispering grass and the empty space where a monument to entitlement once stood, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Justice had come, Not just through courts and verdicts, but through change, through remembering, through peace.